Everyone has a dream. And St. Ignatius of Loyola, like everyone, he had a dream also. And not just any dream. His dream was holy and it was bold. What did he want to do? He wanted to serve God in Jerusalem. That was his plan and his vision. And God said no. Because God has something else in mind. So, if we zoom in on the story of an unexpected friendship, shattered plans, and the quiet way God redirects us. Not away from our mission, as sometimes it might seem, but he directs us deeper into that mission that he himself has given to us. When St. Ignatius arrived at the University of Paris, Sorbonne, in 1528, he was 38 years old. He was at least a decade older than most of the students. So as you can see, he wasn't your typical student. Besides that, he hadn't come to Paris chasing his ambitions. He had come chasing God's will. And in Paris, St. Ignatius threw himself into study and prayer. Among the students there in the university was a young man from Navarre named Francis Xavier. He was charismatic, athletic, and aiming for status. Francis had all the makings of a rising star. He dreamed of that influence in the courts and social prestige, and very ambitious, confident, and totally unimpressed by St. Ignatius. The two had, for some reason, become roommates, but weren't instantly friends. However, what started as, you could say, two strangers meeting at university would become one of the greatest spiritual friendships in the history of the church. A friendship, I would say, that would help shape the future of the world. In fact, St. Ignatius' spiritual conversations, they annoyed Francis. Because, he had big plans. He wanted power, influence, and a successful career that would bring him lots of prestige. But St. Ignatius saw something more profound in Francis. And instead of pressuring him, St. Ignatius simply lived his life quietly, praying and waiting for the right moment. Eventually, that moment came when Francis began noticing that the joy that St. Ignatius carried and wondered if he himself was chasing the wrong kind of glory. So slowly his heart began to soften. He listened, he prayed, and his life changed forever. That's where the mission really began. It was on August the 15th in the year 1534, St. Ignatius, along with St. Francis and 5 other companions, they went up the hill at Montmartre and made their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Marking, you could say, the beginning of what would soon become the Society of Jesus. They were ready to give their lives for Christ and believed he was calling them to go to the Holy Land. They wanted to follow in the footsteps of the apostles. So they studied theology, they prepared spiritually, and they went so far as to arrange for ships from Venice to take them to the Holy Land. Now, you could say this was plan A. It was a holy and bold plan. But as they waited in Venice for their voyage, the world began to unravel. War with the Turks closed all the routes to the Holy Land. The gates to their dream seemed to have been slammed shut in their face. So, what do you do when the door that you were sure about that was going to be open for you was suddenly shut and closed? When you've given God everything and he still says no, it would have been easy to feel like the mission had failed. But instead, St. Ignatius turned to plan B, and they placed themselves at the feet of the Pope, of the Holy Father, ready to go anywhere in the world for the greater glory of God. And this became something much, much greater than any of them could have imagined. The foundation of the Society of Jesus, a missionary order that would reach every corner of the globe. Jerusalem had been their dream, but Rome became their calling. On June 24th, in the year 1537, St. Ignatius and most of his companions were ordained priests. But instead of jumping straight into action, they entered a season of quiet preparation. Almost 18 months of waiting, serving in small ways, and spending long hours in prayer. During that, you could say, hidden stretch of time, St. Ignatius experienced one of the most defining moments of his life. He shared with his friends that one day, while he was praying, he saw our Lord carrying his cross, and beside him, the Eternal Father, who said, "I wish you to take this man as your servant." And Jesus took St. Ignatius and said, "My will is that you should serve us." More than a year would pass before St. Ignatius celebrated his first Mass. When the day finally came, on Christmas Day in the year 1538, it took place at the church of St. Mary Major in Rome, a quiet, holy beginning to what lay ahead. By 1540, their small group had grown into a new religious order, the Society of Jesus, officially approved by Pope Paul III. St. Ignatius would remain in Rome for the rest of his life, organizing missions, writing letters, and forming men who would carry the gospel across the world. St. Francis, meanwhile, would go east, further than anyone expected, preaching in India, Indonesia, and Japan, and nearly making it to China before dying on a small island, giving himself entirely for the gospel. But even as the Society of Jesus grew, the road wasn't easy. When St. Ignatius first drafted the constitutions of the Jesuits, his life work, he faced resistance. Unfortunately, not everyone understood this new kind of religious order, and not everyone wanted change. There were criticisms, delays, and moments when the entire project seemed like it might just completely fall apart. Still, St. Ignatius pressed on. He entrusted everything to our Blessed Mother, to whom he had already given his life. In the early days of his conversion, he had laid down his sword before her at the shrine of Montserrat. Years later, he was still laying down his plans again and again. And that's the invitation for us too. How often do we think we know what serving God should look like? We make our plans. They're good plans, even say holy plans. And then nothing works out the way that we imagined. But that's where the true trust begins. Perhaps that closed door isn't a dead end. It's a redirection. Maybe the failure of plan A is how we discovered that plan B was God's plan A all along, and a much more glorious plan A than the one that we imagined. If we look closely, and we will see that sometimes those small, overlooked moments and disappointments might actually be part of a divine redirection. And when things get confusing, when the path changes and shifts, that's the best time to turn to our Blessed Mother. She knows what it's like to receive a mission from God, and then watch it unfold in ways no one could have imagined, could have predicted. She didn't cling to her own expectations. She said yes over and over again. And following her example is precisely why we should do the same thing. So, if you've been wrestling, to say, with a closed door, or watching a dream just fall apart, maybe it's time to ask, what redirection is God trying to show me? And maybe it's time to consecrate your life to our Blessed Mother. So for this, I'm going to leave a link in the description below to our free consecration. Don't hesitate. Go ahead. Click on that link. Make the commitment, and she'll take care of the rest. When St. Ignatius left Spain, he had no idea what God had in store for him. He thought the mission was Jerusalem, but the real mission was the whole world, the church, the souls who needed his yes. And through it all, he lived the Jesuit motto, ad maiorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. Even when the path shifted and the dream changed, he kept giving his all, not for his plans, but for God's glory. So don't be afraid of the unexpected. Your plan B might just be heaven's plan A. In our next video, we will dive into the surprising truth that surrendering isn't weakness. It's the beginning of real strength. We'll be going back to the moment everything changed for St. Ignatius. You won't want to miss it. So, hope to see you then. God bless and Salve Maria.